Tonight I'm reading some selections from a book called The Best Little Boy in the World by Andrew Tobias. It's several sections taking place when he was quite young, and describes the trials and tribulations of growing up. It was summer. I was 18, and in the fall, I was headed for Yale. They knew all about me, of course: name, address, phone, high school grades and activities, test scores. But there was one thing they didn't know. They didn't know I was gay. No one would ever know. I mean, talk about building a wall. I had one a mile high surrounding that piece of news. And I was pretty good at faking it. In high school, all you had to do was ogle the girls, make a few crude comments, nudge your buddies, that sort of thing. But in college, you had to do more than just leer and make crude comments. You had to date. Well, maybe you didn't have to if you weren't worried about your normality, but if you were me, you had to date. Not counting high school parties and camp dances, where everyone had to go by the busload, I can remember having 3 dates before entering Yale. First, I was 7. It was with Holly Fry, who would cry at the slightest provocation. She would cry if cookie crumbs got on her dress. She would cry when she heard someone else crying. I certainly didn't like her, but for some reason, my mother and her mother arranged what I guess is now called a play date. Anyway, it was a disaster. We started playing with my chemistry set. And you know the litmus paper bit? She used an entire piece of litmus paper to test, I don't know, lemonade or something. Well, anybody knows you're only supposed to use just a tiny corner of the litmus paper. The whole piece, my God. She used the whole piece. All right, I didn't hit her, but I said something nasty, and then I ignored her, which is hard to do because she immediately started to cry, wail, scream, and howl. Finally, her mother took her home. To my relief, dumb girl. My second date, I think I was 13 or so. I can't remember this girl's name, but I remember she was a regular at the dances I would force myself to go to. I was infatuated at the time with a genuine preppy guy who flew into the city only for vacations. He suggested we double date. Now, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do with him, but I thought, you know, like in the movies, cowboys, they ride on their horses together, go to the saloon, hang out around the campfire. Anyway, in my eagerness to be cowboys with the preppy, I got a date. We doubled to a double feature, my first movie date. Movie people are forever making movies of kids going to movies early in their sexual careers to experiment with arms around their dates. Round a little further, hand cupped around what someday might be a breast, another hand moving toward the popcorn. And the movie the 4 of us went to may have been one like that, I can't recall. I just spent the 4 hours watching what the preppy did and doing as much as I could to my date as I could bring myself to do. I'd put my arm around the back of her chair, and once by mistake, I think it kind of brushed her shoulder. The problem was I felt nearly as uncomfortable not doing anything as I would have felt doing something. I wanted to do something the way the preppy did. But all I could do for 4 hours was wonder, what made me different? Some kind of upside-down chromosome? My third date, I was about 15. My last summer at camp, and Tommy Roth, it was his last summer too. Tommy was another one I wanted to play cowboys with. Tommy was dating a counselor at our city camp. Who was I dating? Had to be dating somebody. So I dated a friend of the counselor's, Hilda. First night, they took a busload of us to seniors to the sister camp for a dance. So it was Hilda and me. The only way you could possibly hold your head up in the bus on the way back to camp was if you had been missed during the evening. That is, if you and your girl had been missed at some point. Maximum points, of course, were scored by the couple who could turn up under the yellow circle of flashlights down at the rifle range where they had mattresses. So Hilda and I had to be missed. This was one test of my manhood I was afraid I was just going to have to fail. I couldn't bring myself to seduce Hilda into the dark, piney woods. As it happened, Hilda had different ideas. She led me through a maze of tables and chairs, through the kitchen and the dishwasher apparatus, to an unguarded screen door, and out into the piney woods. She was hot, she said. Why not go for a walk? I stopped after a few yards to try to marshal my resources for some kind of brilliant excuse. When I got older, I planned to use the one about having my whatchamacallit shot off during the war. But Hilda knew I knew Hilda would not have accepted this from a 15-year-old. Maybe I could say it was shot off at the archery range. No, I started to open my mouth in a hesitating kind of way because I was not sure of what I was going to say. And Hilda, all of a sudden, grabbed me as though she were an alcoholic and I were the last bottle of gin on earth. She pressed her lips hard against mine. I held my breath. The kiss itself, my first on the lips, could have been worse. Nothing more, nothing less. But knowing that it was nothing more when it should have been, and far worse, knowing that when this kiss was over, and it was dragging on and on, Hilda and the world wouldn't have discovered that I did not know how to kiss, and that was awful. Finally, she loosened her grip, moved her face away, and I was prepared for the worst. I mean, I had just stood there, after all. Whatever kissing is, however they do it in the movies, I had just stood there. But do you know what she said? She said, "Ooh, that was wonderful. It's been a month since I had a man." That line sent a lot of conflicting signals. Of course, I was tremendously relieved to know I could pass for a lover just by standing in the woods, letting her squish her lips up against mine. I felt like remarking in amazement, crying with relief, laughing at the ridiculous things she had said, gloating at having pulled it off. And now she was doing it again. I'd heard of French kissing, but I didn't think that's what we were doing. Before she started to get into that, I figured I would take a gamble, newly self-confident as I was. And when she backed away, I said in my deepest leadership kind of voice, "I think we better get back before they miss us." And she dutifully followed her man back to the dance. That was the sexual experience I brought with me to Yale. And now I had to date in earnest. This was the major leagues. A few people were even talking about getting married, for crying out loud. Okay, freshman year, the first thing I did, subscribe to Playboy. Like a blind man at a silent movie, I was religiously thumbed through the monthly Playboy, forcing myself to check out, leer, and nudge my roommate, Roger. I would hang the centerfold on the wall over my bed for everybody to see. Of course, each time I returned from a vacation, I told my roomie lascivious stories designed to be impossible to check. I was still hung up on a couple girls at home, and what's there to do in New Haven anyway? High school girls? The authorities seemed to be on my side. Freshmen were not allowed cars. Girls were allowed in the rooms from 4 to 6 on Tuesdays or Saturdays or some equally Victorian bits of time. But was I going to argue with prudish administrators? No. The people at Yale were genuinely considerate of freshman problems. and offered counseling services of all kinds to make it easier to assume manhood, conform to acceptable social standards. On an ad hoc basis, faculty members would also try to help. More than one would look at my cosmic depression expression and ask me what was troubling me. I remember being alone in the office of a young geology professor who radiated sympathy and understanding as he invited me to open up. He seemed to sense that I had never opened up to anyone. He wanted to help me break out of my shell. Go ahead, he said. Tell me anything. Tell me the worst thing. He wouldn't be shocked. No. I wasn't going to be fooled by that one. The last time somebody had told me to go ahead and say the worst thing I could think of, I was 11. Just finishing elementary school, we were all over at Wendy's house for a class party. We were playing a new game. Everyone was given a crayon and a scrap of paper. We had to think of the worst word we could, write it on the paper, and we would fold the papers, hand them in, and Wendy would read a story. Only the story had blanks in it, and every time she came to a blank, she would fill in the word from the next folded paper. Fun? No. Like all party games, it made me nervous. Just how bad a word were you supposed to write? I think somebody asked that, or maybe several of us did. Wendy made it clear we were supposed to write a really bad word. Well, my natural instinct was to write a word like darn, or even damn. That was about as bad as I usually could get. In fact, while darn was tolerated in our house, damn was not. But I was well aware that normal kids had vocabulary far filthier than mine. And if the object of this crazy game was to be bad, I wanted to be bad with the best of them. I had been trained to win, after all. And there may be a bit of rebellion in what I wrote. As the papers were all anonymous, I could do just what they said and write a really bad word. Wendy collected all the papers and started reading her story. Once upon a time, there was a young prince named Arthur and a young princess named Guinevere. They lived in a toilet by a beautiful, ugly, on the other side of the hill from a wart. One day, feeling kind of backside, the prince and the princess called their puke on the devil and said, "We are going to take a walk and probably have a..." Wendy burst into tears and went running to her mother with what I could only assume was my word. In retrospect, I have to congratulate myself in not only having written the worst word, but also have written the only word that fit the context of the story perfectly. But at the time, I was a nervous wreck. If I didn't look nervous, they wouldn't know it was me who wrote it. But I kept trembling anyway. Of course, if my friend Chip Morgan had written the word, he would have just sat there smirking and mischievously, or if he was caught, he would have taken his spanking and exile without a gulp. In fact, if Chip had written that word, I would wish I had. But I had done the deed, and Wendy's mother, who apparently had not sanctioned the game to begin with, came running in to find out who had the red crayon. Oh no, oh my God, done in by a red crayon. Of course, how could I be so dumb? How could I fall into their trap? Actually, there were several red crayons. So, while guilt was clearly written in 4 letters over my face, a reasonable doubt had to remain in the mind of the jury, and they did not call the Supreme Court. But that was the last time I was going to fall into any of this. Go ahead, tell us your words, thoughts. We won't be shocked. Bull.